All right, welcome everyone to the exhibition round of NUDC Seleksi Wilayah 2025. Thank you everyone for making it to this exhibition round. Um, we'll be debating under the motion, this House prefers reactive over proactive enforcement of environmental regulations. Without any further ado, to start the debate, please welcome PM. Here.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I would like to start this debate by setting up a little bit about what is gonna be talked about in this discussion, right? So first of all, I think based on the context slide that are given, this discussion would heavily focus and centered into the housing crisis and housing regulation that exists in one country, right? This debate exists because bureaucracy, with the burden of catering to a whole country population, is heavily flawed, and it is a system that is very slow, have been proven by a lot of real life cases of people trying to apply for a permit but did not get granted for a really long time, even though it is a dire situation, right? Secondly, government main priority would be determining the factors of winning argument. The government of the country priority would be the determining factors of winning arguments that would be brought upon on this debate, right? Thirdly, remember, in reactive enforcement by the government, regulation already exists. So it's not like we're starting from a blank slate of page. Law against unregulated building already exists. With reactive enforcement, we just want people or individuals or companies or contractor companies to have the freedom to essentially create a projects, either it's whether it's for individual benefit or whether it's for a company benefit, right? Moving on to my first argument, why do reactive enforcement would be better in a situation like this? So reactive enforcement actually encourage innovation and efficiency. Businesses or like contractor and company, even individual, can act quickly without being slowed down by bureaucracy, as I have said in my setup. Proactive permitting often delay projects and discourage sustainable innovation from happening. Why does this matter why does this actually matter right now? Because there's a lot of housing crisis, migration is happening, and urbanization is something that could not be stopped or prevented, right? People would still move from a smaller town or a town without
We'll see.
with yes.
Who will enforce this? Who will sue? Can people sue, or only government bodies can sue
Okay,
and
okay.
give this punishment?
Okay, so basically, I will explain that later in my second argument, right? But first, housing crisis, migration, and urbanization would still happen regardless even if there is a danger of housing crisis right now, right? With the slow functioning bureaucracy that needs to cater to a lot of people, it would take even slower, and it would increase the higher chance of slums to appear in urban cities, right? So there will be more like very undeveloped area that would appear in urban cities because of the difficulty to create a permit. Hence, people need to, improvise in terms of housing, right? Addressing overpopulation and urbanization should be the main priority and main discussion of this debate. Regulatory bodies don't need to review every single project in advance with the existence of reactive enforcement. So with limited resources, that the regulatory bodies, so basically to answer the closing POI, the people that are gonna regulate is the regulatory bodies that already exist in the government. Basically, people that often check on regulation of housing, people that often check like quality control of the building that are being created by certain companies, right? With big project, there will be check and balances coming from the government, right? Because government is, responsible to for the safety of the people, especially if it's a big project, right? Even if it's a small project, they would still check it. Limited resources coming from government with the existence of reactive enforcement it can instead be focused on detecting and punishing the worst offender. So people who actually do not care about the regulation at all, instead of mainly focusing on people who already are trying to follow the regulation, and it's actually actually it's eliminating the process of those people who actually have actually have abide to the regulation from being suspected, right? With a proactive permit, the government assume that everybody is guilty until they prove that they are innocent by giving the government like their documents, their list of material that they're gonna use, and so on and so forth. So reactive enforcement respect freedom and actually push the autonomy of those people, of the people that are actually trying to construct something, right? Punishing only those who actually have caused harm. So moving on to my second argument, why this reactive enforcement is important, right? Is actually creating a strong and why is there still a check and balance with reactive enforcement? Strong deterrence through penalties would still exist. So if opposition is going to argue that there is not enough check and balances and not enough penalties coming from our side in order to prevent people from breaching regulation that already been established by the government, if the penalties are severe, aka having massive fining people massive amount of money, having restoration orders and stuff like that, companies will still regulate to avoid risk of losing their credibility. This creates a system where only responsible actors will survive. Contractor would be more careful, creating and this awareness would and this scenario would create awareness in contracting company and even the individual that are trying to hire contracting company and the people to be able to research before they hire certain contractor company. It would still work because previous cases of property not meeting regulated standards set by the government would add into the reactive reinforcement goal that the government is trying to achieve, because now there's a real life example of what happened if you don't regulate your project. So the argument that opposition is if opposition is trying to push that there is no check and balances, there is. If opposition is worried about housing bubbles that are going to happen, we are aware of the 2008 housing crisis, economic crisis. Developer won't just bask in negligence and housing root and the root cause of problem is because of the economy policy that fails the people, not the bloom of housing. That's why this motion should stand. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. To open the case from OO, please welcome Leader of Opposition. Here.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Quick response on OG's claim. First, they say that the government resources are limited. It's so unrealistic to they say that it's unrealistic to check every project in advance. For example, they said that big project already have check and balance. For example, so proactive and necessary. Let's respond first. I think limited resources means that this is a reason for smarter proactive, not a reactive. Judge, I think the limited resources do not mean that we abandon the proactive. It means that we prioritize the most risky projects like mining, oil, and large forestry, for examples. Even in partial proactive, checks prevent the harm at the end of the day. I think reactive means we watch the resource after disasters, means that we spend more expenses on the prevention, for example. Second one is big projects. Having checks is not enough. Yes, mega project like new capital city, for example, or power plants have checks, but first, most environmental harm comes from the medium and small scale projects like illegal logging, for example, small mines, palm oil expansion, for example. This end up from a huge cumulative damage in if unchecked, for example. If we only check big project, we miss the hidden but massive harm from the many smaller factor, because OG only talk about big project will always have check and balance, for example. Reactive is the third one is reactive is more costly in long term. I think oil spills, flood, for example, or forest fire, for example, at the end of the day, will spend billions in recovery. The government resources are more wasted in reactive cleanup, like the oil spill or the flood, and etc., etc. Hence, we have to more like to be proactive at the end of the day. Let's be comparative on these OG's cases. Gov says the resources are limited, but I think spending on preventions like one check, one permit before the damage, or spending the cleanup and the composition at the day of the at the end of the day means that everything that OG says about the resources is more have massive damage because yeah, if you have limited resources means that you have to make a more smart investment to redo to make the AMDAL first at the end of the day. The second one is OG says about the freedoms. They says that reactive enforcement bring more freedom for individuals or company to innovate, will and act. For examples, I think first freedom to destroy is not the real freedoms. Judge, I think the freedom definition from OG is to pollute the rivers, cut the forest without checking the valuable of this freedom. For example, I think it harm millions of people freedom rather than this company or this corporation. For example, freedom to breathe the clean air, for example, or freedom to farm in the safe land, for examples. I think everything that environmental harm restrict from is very restrict far from the freedoms that permit ever do. For examples, the second one, I think the freedom under the proactive is still wide. Proactive does not mean we ban the projects. It only require basic responsibility to check before the starting. People still have free to innovate, but very safety. Like for examples, on how we required driving license is not to stop the freedom, but to protect everyone on the road. Back to the clarification on under OO. First, I think we need I think this is the story of environmental protection is not story of paperwork, it's a story of survival. Means that the choice today is not between on how different kind of for examples, but between the prevention and catastrophe. Our side is proud to defend the proactive environment. Means that we want to, when it comes to the environment, once damage happens, no one can bring back to the beginning at the end of the day. How the reactive enforcement under the opening of opposition? First, freedom first and the punishment later. Means that for example, like Pertamina oil spill, for example, government will find them with after the pollution already destroyed the fishery, but in under proactive enforcement, approval first, prevention before the harm, means that many company in Kalimantan, for example, must pass the environmental assessment before digging. I think this is a comparative debate, which means which word is better if we prefer reactive or proactive. I think there is a burden under this debate. First, Gov must prove that reactive is better under protecting the environment. For example, OP only needs to prove that proactive is better at preventing irreversible harm and securing long-term survival skill. First argument under OO. I think environmental damage is reversible, so for instance, is always better than punishment. But before that, yes.
So imagine like there are countless companies or contractors trying to file their permit and everything else. Wouldn't that breed cronyism and also bribery?
I think the problems on that problems is have more cost at the end of the day rather than on how they will have freedom, for example, to access the permission. For example, so I think when it comes to proactive at the end of the day, it's better because environmental damage is irreversible. Once harm happen, no fine or punishment can bring them back at the end of the day. Means in reactive system, company act first and only if something goes wrong, they get punished. But by the time they are punished, the harm is already done. I think the fines cannot replace the clean air, for example, or the healthy water and the loss of this people at the end of the day, right? I think let's see on how Pertamina oil happened in Karawang, for example, so when people have massive damage on fishery, people have lost their job, for example. At the end of the day, the people from UMKM at the day or of the smart people economists cannot access everything this OG come to this debate. The impact is the environmental collapse directly after the human life. People lost their food resources, clean water, means that everything that coming from the OG's case about the freedoms and about the initiative, for example, to or based on their case about limited resource cannot happen at the other side. I think if we compare this, government side may argue that reactive is more efficient, comes or give more freedom, but efficiency is reversible. I think economy can be recovered, but and business can adapt. But when environmental is not reversible, for examples, yeah, we cannot bring them back at the end of the day. Second argument is about on how environmental damage is not only permanent, it's also lasts across the generation. I think in our side, reactive systems only act after the harm, but environmental harm does not end quickly. For example, like climate change, deforestation, for examples, means that in our side we will protect all this before it happen. We will check every company, for example, every initiative to before they coming to their job. Yeah, for all this reason, very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the case from OG, please welcome DPM. Hey here.
Thank you. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. First of all, I want to applaud opening opposition for taking the extreme, talking about oil rigs and all of these projects, but zero comparative and how proactive enforcement magically resolve all of the problem that they're talking about. I'm going to flip this, and therefore their case will fall. We agree it is a comparative debate, but I don't think opening opposition walk the talk themselves because they're not even comparing their case against the problems that my prime minister already talked about. Never mind what my PM talk when my PM talk about housing crisis, when they talk about lack of any enforcement or any sort of remedy for problems like low housing supply and everything else. Instead, they talk about all of these extreme projects and everything else. Well, first of all, the info slide kind of assumes that the debate is talking about housing, but sure, we're going to deal with whatever they're talking about, big projects, whatever, etc. Two things in my speech. One, regarding housing crisis, and by extension, also urbanization, what do you call it? Gentrification and all of the problems that they fail to address. And number two, why then proactive enforcement will only breed cronyism and also oligarchy. Firstly, on the point regarding housing crisis, I think it's important for us to understand, right? Building housing right now, it's so slow and expensive because permits take months, if not years. Developers need consultants, lawyers, and connections just to get approvals that we have been talking about in the beginning, which delays construction, which delays the actual speed that people can get all of their housing. It keeps housing supply low, which makes rents and also home price skyrocket because there's just not enough supply for people. But the problem that opening opposition did not negate or did not even deny or not even address to begin with is the fact that these problems are more likely to occur in mega cities, which means that a lot of people are still gonna come. A lot of people are still going to be enticed by the idea that their lives can be better, which only increase more slum areas, which only increase more housing crisis, and be at the mercy of the government, who's God knows are going to like evict them, just like in certain areas, right? And therefore, small families, people, the middle class will not have any sort of option because it's taking too long on side opposition, and that's something that they need to address. On our side, at least builders can build right away without waiting in line for permission, as long as they follow clear environmental guidelines. And this is the thing, right? Because opening opposition assumed that all of the regulations do not exist on our side. Obviously, the info slide implies that, which means that to a certain extent, there will already be some sort of like engineering, structural, construction standards that you need to follow. And therefore, most importantly, you're not going to check at the end because the inspections are likely to happen on daily basis because you want to make sure they comply. That's how you track regulations, guys. It's not like you wait until the end. And this is like the comparative in any sort of situation because audit happens every single time. Maybe not every day, sure, but at least in periodic sense and not like only at the end. That's why that we reject this notion because that's practically co-opting our side. And why then it will be worse on their side, I will talk about on the second argument, but I still want to talk about the housing crisis, which they do not engage with at all. Because eventually on our side, as long as you follow clear environmental rules like controlling noise or making sure that the strength of the land, I don't know, like the details of it are sufficient, right, to hold the foundations of a house, for example. If they break the rules, the government can fine them, shut down the project, or force repairs immediately using the money that they pay to the government. Comparatively, on their side, the government will have to pay because there's no such thing as like, oh, it's proactive, so you need to sign this NDA that you're going to pay for any sort of like failures in the future. That's basically reactive because you're expecting them to do something once things go wrong, which means that you're not going to get that benefit on your side. And that's why on our side, new homes get built faster and cheaper, especially by smaller players as well, which lowers overall costs and eases the housing crisis, something that opposition need to deal with. CEO.
If regulation change in 5 years' times, would you retroactively apply this policy and punish them?
I fully expected this question because I wanted to throw this burden to you. Because if regulations change, because building houses, building mega projects do not only take 1 year or even 2 years, it takes longer than that too. Which means if regulations change on your side, what are you going to do with the construction that you have built the permit for? Meaning that eventually that you're also going to like, hey, you know what, you've done this, and this is no longer aligned with the change in regulation that you were talking about. But at least if there's change on regulation on our side, we can inform them right away. Hey guys, there's an update. This is something that you need to do. If you do not comply with this, you need to pay the fines, which means it's definitely comparatively more accountable on our side. So that question is a burden that opposition needs to answer. Second argument then, or not argument rather, the second case that opening government talk about is regarding how proactive enforcement breeds cronyism and also like oligarchy in general. Because when officials get to decide who gets a permit, right? Because everyone wants to line up because they see business opportunities, it creates power and discretion among these people. Big developers with money and connections can pay consultants, can lobby politicians, or use insider networks to get approvals faster. And this is the reality that every other countries in the world face. So they cannot run away with this situation. Meanwhile, any smaller projects or those who really just want to like alleviate the housing crisis wait forever or are blocked by endless hearings and lawsuits that will happen on side opposition. And environmental rules get used as an excuse to block affordable housing in cities, pushing construction into like any other areas which eventually get worse. Why then we fix this? Because number one, on proactive enforcement, on their side, proactive enforcement on their side, there's little follow up because you assume that once you get the permit, everything is done. And they will only follow up unless there's complaint, which means that there is a possibility of developers organization cut corners. What stops them from saving because it's all already done? So leader of opposition's harm are infinitely worse on their side and they cannot co-opt our mechanism. At least on our side, these things are monitored, maybe again, not on daily basis, weekly basis, whatever. But any violation will result in penalties. So there is any incentive. There's a lot of incentive to cut costs on our side to make sure that they no need to push for to violate the rules and everything else. Which means that these fines can fund restoration, which is cheaper, therefore, to follow the rules rather than breaking them. But who pays in opposition if things happen? Taxpayers, because these developers are not expected to pay or can file for bankruptcy, which means they can run away from responsibility. Anything that OO said is a result of over reliance on permits processing, especially in large projects. You give them too much power, side with opening government.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the case from OO, please welcome the DLO. Here.
Speech in 3, 2, 1. When an oil refinery leaks toxic black sludge to rivers and coastlines in places like Balikpapan and northeastern Brazil, I don't think a lawsuit can solve the problem that it creates. Yes, the company might pay up, which in fact they didn't, by the way. They filed for bankruptcy or just grab their way in court. But regardless, even if they pay, the oil spill permanently ruins the livelihood of millions of local fishermen or farmers, taking their livelihood because it kills their source of income, taking even their clean drinking water, not to mention giving them cancer or God knows what other disease ingesting refinery chemicals can give you. Furthermore, in most of these cases, the company ends up continuing the exploitation under the argument of what's done is done, at least let's make this worth it. This is the cost of allowing companies to act recklessly, and we don't think it's worth it. If we can choose one approach, we will prefer to be proactive, and we will try the governments and regulators proactively do things like requiring companies and individuals to plan ahead, submit their plans, designs, go through rigorous evaluations and reviews before carrying out their project, rather than reacting and cleaning for the mess afterwards. Since DPM pointed out, what is the delta then from proactive approach? That's the first that's the first thing I'm going to answer. There are three things that you can get better from doing a proactive approach. The first is that you can preventively screen project that is clearly bad, like building oil refinery in places that is prone to tsunami and earthquake, which happened, by the way, and caused the oil spill in 2019 happened. I think all of these are common sense things that can be very easily flagged. Um, if they are more proactive, perhaps billions might be saved in terms of opportunity cost and other extensive damage. The second delta is that you also help companies and stakeholders like local governments to do things like assessing the risk, making mitigation plan in case things blow up. This helps the company refine and improve their design plan because you force them to make one beforehand. You force them to see and really check if it is up to standard or point out the potential risks. We also help locals prepare, for instance, what to do if things blow up, how to evacuate perhaps. So like even if the thing might blow up in the end, there are significantly much more preparation in terms of doing things to prevent things from blowing up, as well as helping the locals to react better if things do blow up. And lastly, it kind of also make a time frame, because you break the company from doing things too fast, you actually force them to slow down. So locals, experts, and other things can join the discussion, can scrutinize the process and give their thought, evaluating the designs as well, or doing protests to oppose these kinds of things. These are the things that you get from a proactive approach, of which you cannot get under a reactive one. Why is it important for you to be proactive and preventive in dealing with such projects? First is that the nature of environmental impact is irreversible and unpredictable. You cannot clean an oil spill after it happens. Probably the coral reef and the local environments already did. And these things can easily spread. At first, it might just be some oil spill. God knows what might happen. It might cause the death of coral reefs around those and creates a catastrophe somewhere else. So I think that's also very important for you to try to predict and assess beforehand. But also, once the second reason is that once the project is built, it's gonna be very hard to halt or take them to be accountable, right? Because there are economic incentive for local politicians and the company to continue, because they already invest a lot in building the oil rig. They will fight to their death to continue operating, or they can simply do things like transfer the ownership and file for bankruptcy when they get lawsuit afterward, running from their duty to repair and pay back, right? So I think all of this shows to you that it's very important for you to be proactive and preventive, as oftentimes reacting is simply not possible. Just some things are just cannot be solved after it's done, and after and as well as it's kind of easy for them to run when we do reactive approach. I'm gonna take one from closing off. 3, 2, 1. Sure. With that said, I'm gonna talk about Gulf case. First, about the housing crisis. For response, first, I don't think the problem is really about bureaucracy only. I think there are also other stems of why housing crisis happens. For instance, the elitist market, perhaps, like the fact that all the construction companies, small to big, are currently building big single houses because that's the biggest margin. That gives them the biggest profit margin in comparison to more modest housing that we actually need for the people. But second response, if it's slow, I think there are a lot of ways you can solve it, right? For instance, you can do priority-based review for projects that are relatively safe, like housing complex. I don't think the reviews are gonna be that difficult and complex. I think the more complex one are going to be given to projects that are high risk in nature, like oil rigs and such, Or you can do things like automating it with AI, LLMs that can now build applications from scratch. I think it's very easy for us to integrate these technologies to check designs, to check whether they comply to regulations. I think it can at least automate some of the tasks so that like flagging the projects that actually do need human review and whatnot. If it's slow, I don't know, hire Google to do something. It's very solvable. Thirdly, I would flip this point, right? I think allowing companies to be reckless with building housing is very dangerous because it's not true that companies are complying with regulations and engineering standards without proper proactive checks, because they have the incentive to be fast, they have the incentive to cut costs, and they can play the blame game. For example, blaming the architecture firm that they built, that they created themselves and hired, in case something happened. This is why, without proper proactive approaches, tofu drag projects in Bangladesh, China, and Turkey breeds disaster, like collapsing under a weak earthquake, killing a lot of people, creating millions or billions of dollars in monetary loss, irreversible death, and yeah. If you weigh this again, yeah, in terms of weighing, I guess I would rather I would rather it to be slow rather than, yeah, all of that. Lastly, in terms of corruption, if it's the case, yeah, they can also bribe their way out of court. I don't think it matters. Oppose.
Thank you for that speech. That marks the end of the opening debate. Um, Also, a reminder for everyone to mention the UI preference so that the other benches can offer their UIs to you. All right, to open the closing bench, CGKs, please welcome member of COF. Here.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, I think regulation is needed to protect or even to prevent the environment from the very first place. What happened under OO is that the issue are too complex to predict, in which causing you or even the government cannot take or take the false action to the point where because what happened to the environmental issues is that it's so unpredictable to be justified, right? Therefore, I think OO case, when they talk about why then proactive enforcement will be likely be more justified, it cannot be taken, because first they cannot prove to you how then those environment issues, when it is so unpredictable to the point, for example like rice, the burning of rice field, for example. I think this is very crucial, and they are only talk about housing problem and etc., in which we think that it is not too urgent to be discussed, right? So what we're going to happen under CG, ladies and gentlemen? We see that wide and reactive enforcement is justified. First, we think that because what happened in environment issue, it's unpredictable. You cannot exactly notice what will going to happen from the very first place. Second of all, we say that it is complex, ladies and gentlemen. Lots of lands, for example, lots of rice field and etc. Even housing problem, which not too urgent in debate when the opening government only talk about the housing issue. We think that it's complex because limited resources to the point where it takes time, even budget, for the government to do the permit with the companies from the very first place. But why then it's still harmful under the government side of the house? We think what happened in status quo, the moment or the ideal of you regulate the environment or environmental regulation, there will be more agreements toward the company itself. What happened, ladies and gentlemen, is that there are no independent coming to the company to be responsible or by taking any kind of harm that access to the status quo. What we mean by this is that we want this company exactly harming or exactly having the punishment towards or give the penalty exactly to what causes them from the very first place. But what independency is so important variable in this debate panel? Notice that reactive constitutes the independence of companies and individual to execute their version of the environment ways, right? Because they should be the one who actually works upon the task, for example, finding how the real conditions in the field, for example. They are the one who is going to conduct the environmental research before implementing their vision of the environment
things and projects. This is very crucial because later on, this company will likely the likelihood of the company itself to have a better regulation in preventing the causing that they are caused will still likely to happen under CG, right? How this is matter and linked to the main problem in this motion, ladies and gentlemen. In the reactive, we want the actors to be the one who accountable upon the action that they take within the legal corridors from the very first place, right? Why is that so? Because the regulation is produced by themselves, so it's not like that we are going to punish them simply because they break the law, for example, but it's because they breach the very regulation that they produce with field of awareness, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, at the end of the day, the action and also the preventing issue that coming from CG will be likely to happen under CG from the very first place, right? But why then we think that it is so? Why then we think at the end of the day it will be so be justified to prefer the reactive over proactive enforcement from the very first place? First, we think that the idea of focusing on the heel problem itself. We think that what happened in status quo is that there are the problem is access, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, I think lots of premise to the company will likely causing to the corruption itself that OO has already mentioned to you. Therefore, I think the issue that coming from OO when he said that corruption access under government is actually also access under their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. But why then CG is way better than OG from the very first place? First, we break the deadlock between the opening debate. Environmental regulations exist in both sides of the house, ladies and gentlemen. For example, like POJK 51 in 2017 that require all public companies to audit their environmental performance. Therefore, under our side, the audit itself is access to prevent the environmental cases that happen in the status quo, right? So what's the difference between government opposition is that the initial process of check and balance toward the environmental regulation that missing in the government bunch, in the government side of the house, right? Therefore, I think in order for you to have a better regulation, to have a better environment regulation, is that by taking the exact way of regulations to punish them even so. Yeah, CO.
Same question that OG has not answered yet. Who will decide that I will punish housing company A and not punish housing company B? Who will determine this?
Okay, I think it's already clear from the very first place where the government will actually the one who taken the responsibility of giving the punishment to the company itself. Because what happened in OO is that society will be likely mitigate will be likely to jump into the discussion of this government false and etc. Right? Moving to my argument, ladies and gentlemen, I think that it is mitigate external failure costs because in our side of the house, the company will maximize their prevention costs because the punish is real. Why it is important from the very first place? Because I think by giving them the reactive enforcement, it gives them a real pictures of what will going to happen if they are causing this kind of a failure towards their company from the very first place, right? This is going to be better under our side because critique from society will be more likely not to happen because society will not likely closing their eyes what happened towards the status quo because it's actually clear enough to the point where you give the punishment to the company because the unpredictable issues that coming in status quo, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, at the end of the day, we think that preventing the environmental issues, reactive is the best solution. For all these reasons, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To open the case from CO, please welcome member of OP. Here.
Unlike OO, CO will come into this debate and be engaging to what OG has established. We will talk not only about how this harms environment or how it has benefited environment and so on and so forth, but we will talk about the incentive structure of a business on how they will only be bad. Why only under our side of the house? We are not saying that permit system 100% solves all the problem, but we say that only under permit system it creates a systemic allowance that allows this system to actually be improving. What are we talking about here? We are talking about, but you know what? A rebuttal's integrated. Let's talk about their case first. Their argument is that we need to encourage business and innovation, and because there's a housing crisis. If you sum up what they are saying, it's basically saying, hey, people need house, so we need to be lenient towards every single system possible to prevent people from building houses that is subpar, that will crumble down and fall down upon these people within 2 years, for example, for the sake of business innovations. Let's engage this one by one, right? They said business will grow under their side of the house. We say it's false. Why? Business is unwilling to enter a system that has possibilities of uncertainties, or possibilities of, the probability of you being punished arbitrarily, right? If business does not want to restrict to under permit, if a business you think it's bad for them to go under through permits to make sure that their buildings are safe, to make sure if they want to open an mining company that their katiga or their safety and waste management is proper, if they want to build a housing company, housings for example, they will use the correct concrete and not asbestos, for example. If they do not want to follow all of this for the sake of business innovation, I don't think they deserve to be here to begin with. I think they are dangerous. I think they're evil. I don't think they will benefit the same way that they want to claim the benefit that people get housing. What I say is people get danger. Under this sense, what have been taught? This look, but moreover than that, inefficiencies are not structural part of the government. We argue to you that discussions and improvements to create regulatory bodies can be done. I will talk about this later. But moreover, uncertainties in business plus policy enforcement that can be selective creates deterrence effect for investors and housings and business alike. Why? Because it creates a possibilities that, hey, what if I got punished later on? What if one day a politician's next election terms constantly scapegoating me by saying, I will punish the previous businesses that previous presidents has allowed to flourish, and I will make this nation great again. What's preventing politicians to punish your business just for political cookie points, for example? Selective enforcements under their side of the house. There are no real check and balances on how it is enforced under their side of the house, because these people are allowed to, these politicians, this state, like what OG and CG concedes, has reserved the absolute power to determine which one to be enforced and which one is not. What happened then? It creates a dangerous precedence. It creates lobbying. It allows only for businesses that are be friends with the politicians to flourish, killing other businesses because other businesses are unwilling to enter your market. This creates monopoly, creates price gouging, creates less enforcements on environmental issues because you are cronying with the politicians at hand. The conclusion on this point is simple. It's higher likelihood of environmental damage due to incentive structure that benefits cronyism. It creates systemic failure and allows corruptions to happen. It disallows business to thrive, creates a system where only businesses that are close with governments to flourish, and worse, it allows businesses like housing, if their example is housing, to be wedged against the government. So if the government fail, the entire businesses fail. it creates a par product as well on top of it. I do not know what problems OG wants to solve. But let's be comparative here. Why permit system solves all of this? We do not say that permit system will ultimately is the solution, but the delta here is on the systemic design plus the incentive structure. Before I move on, opening, go.
If companies are truly evil, like you said, what's stopping them from lobbying and bribing and cut costs once permits are out because there's no incentive to audit as it goes?
Oh, this is interesting part. This is exactly my point. Because permits can be systematically designed to be distributed system, i.e. your waste management will go to ministry A, but your land permit goes to ministry B, your other permits, because if you want to create housing, if you want to open a mine, if you want to create factories, there are multitude of layers of permits that you need to have and needs to be renewed every single year. This inherent distributed system creates a better chance of preventing cronyism. It can be systematically designed to be distributed rather than centralized, similar to how lots of European countries implement this. This is just to make sure that we are not horse-strapped to only certain countries that are currently struggling to implement certain proper systems. But why permit system solves all of this? A, it forces transparency on who gets the permit and who doesn't. It allows court or judicial system, allows Freedom of Information Act to open up. Why do you give permit to company A and not give permit to company B? A system where each layers check and balance each other. A system where each companies and businesses have access to the same playground. Yes, it can be corrupted, but it's amazing that we can discover all these corruptions through all these layers, which means transparency can happen under this distributed system. And under our side of the house, we do not need to change our policy that much through the means of distributed systems that allow technocrats to be on every layer on the system rather than an absolute power by the people who enforces the system. Oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the case from CG, please welcome Government Whip here.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, to break the deadlock between the opening debate, let's clarify many things. Environmental regulation exists in both sides. For example, POJK 51 in 2017 that require a public company to audit their environmental performance, or plantation regulation, for example, specification of plantation area with treatment that should not to be out to the public area. This is why our idea about environmental protection is an exclusive in the first place. So what's the difference between the government and the opposition bands? I think this is just about the initial process of check and balance toward the environmental regulation that missing in the government bans, but higher sensitivity or skepticism of the government itself toward the practice of the individual or company regarding its environmental practice and safety for the environmental regulation for a long term. Secondly, I will compare why CG should won in this debate, starting with OG. Firstly, we love OG set up about housing issue, but unfortunately, this debate talks more than that, including the implementation of environmental practice, like the way you produce your finished good or treat your waste. I think Jen give a very clear contextualization about how the reactive enforcement will exist. Jen explained to you that framework or specification regarding the environmental regulation will exist anyway, but no need permit for the initial process. But at least there are information that communicate by the government. But B, Jen also explained the mechanization about how we can report for the reactive enforcement will comes from the public when they experience the detrimental effect, and how the journalists as the check and balance were looking for a big or hit news when some company did a greenwashing, like what happened in clothes manufacturing industry and USA. So the first significant contribution coming from CG is explain or reconstruct what missing in OG about how we can detect or control this company via the reactive enforcement. But secondly, we love PM idea about the principality of law that you should punish someone when you can certainly prove someone is not innocent. But unfortunately, in both sides, law will move with evidence anyway, so there is no exclusivity. Then the second significant contribution coming from CG is explain what's the exclusivity of the reactive enforcement, which regulation sensitivity. OJ just explained to you that the government will not have a justification to sue someone because they will make an excuse since the government proving their permit first. But we think the urgent condition of the environmental brings by Jane is very important because it proves to you that everything is very dynamic now, especially the regulation. It's for the environmental. So it's not talking about the throwing responsibility talks in the opening debate, but we understand that what you apply in this year might be different which you apply in your regulation later. So why the check and balance can better in our side? Because there is no excuse for you to caused by the different regulation in the future, since the government will always communicate ongoing regulation in our side. And then secondly, let's compare with CO. I think we love CO idea about the systemic allowance in certain years, but this is the exact reason why CG exclusivity should winning this debate, because A, CO once again didn't answer why auditing process will never exist anyway, since this is the one of the agenda of the international environmental body. So publicity of their progressivity and their responsibility toward the public will exist anyway. But secondly, CG make a clear incentive why people will more likely to be sensitive to the new regulation of the environmental, because they need to always update to ensure that they are not violate the regulation, right? And the second issue, the politicians cases. I think first, if bad politician is symmetrical happen in both sides, then the bad bureaucracy, the way you pass bad practice will exist anyway in CO. Because at the end, the issue is still the same because on the one who run this regulation, especially in the internal bodies of the government itself, including like the cases of reporting your waste to your ministry. I think it's still dependent into your politician right in both sides. But secondly, talks about the judgment or scoring toward a certain company to give more benefit or penalty. I think that this is also currently happen in the status quo. For example, in Indonesia, we have Ministry of Environmental that labeling certain company to be black with a bad environmental practice, blue who have a very good environmental practice, and all of this still have the good parameter or standard, which is from the quality, which is from the result of their audit. So I think that they need to answer why this agenda, especially coming from your current ministry, isn't enough anyway. Because if they cannot to answer this, and then yeah, the urgency no longer can stand in this debate. Before that, closing.
At the very least, we provided a system that can work. Under your set of doubts, it's a systemic failure that will never work.
Okay, I will engage it into the last comparison, especially with OO. I think we love OO idea regarding the cost and mitigation via proactive enforcement. But I think there are three issues. Firstly, the cost issue. We think cost should not to be the main issue here, because OO also didn't manage to explain the contextualization why cost is bigger in our side. Because if we should flip this idea, or agree that initial bureaucracy will be bigger in their side. It means that they need extra human resource and the facility for it. So bigger costs will more likely to happen on their side. But secondly, mitigation issue. OO case regarding the Karawang just proved how reporting process from the public exists anyway. Then the question is why it's not enough anyway on this side. But if we should flip this idea, A, Jen already explained to you the incentive of the individual or corporation to do better, because no pressure in initial process. It means the stakeholder will take an advantage from here by trying their best to proving the external that they have a good environmental practice. Especially in our side, annual audit will exist anyway. But B, Jen already exists to you that heavy punishment or penalty can given in our side by reactive enforcement. Especially company will always have an incentive to avoid extra cost, right? Because it can decrease their net income in their profit and loss report. But thirdly, it can engage with CO POI. Extra explanation to engage external failure cost in OO. I will bring the concept of environmental cost. In management accounting, company inherently serve more money for prevention and appraisal costs to mitigate external failure costs. So the incentive for the individual or the corporate to mitigate the external failure will exist in both sides. Especially you need to protect the legitimation, validation, and reputation coming from the public, exactly your potential customer. So for OO to win this debate, they need to explain why the stakeholder here suddenly reckless. But B, even if the external failure cost is exists, we think the responsibility is still there, right? For example, in Sidoarjo, where people get a money as compensation to move from Lumpur Lapindo area. So there is no urgency stand in OO with their proactive enforcement. Then lately, what's the answer for their systemic coming from CO? I think that this is the things that CEO need to understand. Firstly, the basic regulation about the framework or the standard, it still happen in both sides. So this also ensure that the company will always understand about, okay, what kind of thing that I cannot to violate at the first place. But secondly, I think the control list will also exist anyway in CG. So proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To close the case from CEO and also the debate as a whole, please welcome opposition with me here.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think we need to know that the important things that about the whole things in this debate is about how it will affect the environment, but also how it's going to be sustained on business to create the perfect environmental regulation to the housings regulations. But before that, let me engage into for all the benches. So first one, I'm going to engage for OG. So about issue about harm, why CO is over OG. They're talking about punishing only giving harm occurs. Punishing is only giving harm. We think that that enforcement should be reactive because punishment can going to be harm for each party, but this is fundamentally insufficient. By the time that the damage is visible, the regulations are applied retroactively rather than preventively. This means that enforcement does not truly prevent harm, but only respond once the harm has already materialized. So comparative disadvantage of reactive punishment. Punishment alone will not work effectively because not all actors, such as contractors or businesses, will comply. For them, it's burdensome in terms of financial resources and regulatory adjustment. And if there's no incentive for proactive enforcement, this creates barriers to accessing justice since economic interests dominate the legal framework. Also, we want to say that why proactive enforcement is better. Without waiting for harm to occur, proactive enforcement already provides a preventive mechanism that is far more sustainable and legally sound for all the parties. So we avoid harm altogether by creating a clear process of regulatory analysis. We also, my member also mentioned about the existence of technocrat, and by creating a clear process that it will allow businesses to be prepared in advance. This foster a more sustainable and responsible business environment instead of relying on post hoc punishment. And moving on to the issue about regulation that can have check and balance. So the government claimed that environment analysis they argue that environmental checks already happen on daily basis. But before that, yeah.
Sorry, I think it's very interesting that member of opposition introduced a new model about how the permit system work, which I think is unfair. However, I don't think CEO dealt with the core flaw in your mechanism. Companies like shortcuts to get profits as early as possible, which means permit in and of itself breeds shortcut seeking behaviors.
Even though they want a shortcut for more easier access, sometimes some business party are still thinking about how much budget that they will going to put on their business strategy. So not all of them are going to apply to have that easier access. Moving on to the extension, so they argue about that environmental checks already happen on daily basis. But this is make it seem that as if environmental damage is normalized and left unchecked, only to be measured after the result appear. And the process is very unclear. Under reactive enforcement, business or construction projects cannot realistically conduct proper check and balance mechanism because everything is dictated by regulation that only apply retroactively. This uncertainty means that where conditions worsen but are deemed normal under reactive frameworks, harms go unnoticed and unaddressed. This burden is never explained by the government, which why we mentioned that why we are better because our side ensure accountability, which is stronger because proactive enforcement includes all stakeholders, business, regulators, and committee in the process. It allows adjustment to be made before and during project based on evolving environmental regulation without waiting for damage to materialize. This creates a system that is preventive, sustainable, and more transparent. Moving on why CO is over OO. So they mentioned about how it will give profit for a long run and also the harm of the big damage like oil and how it can predict beforehand. We are better than OO because they only highlight immediate impact and profit without providing a clear analysis of long-term consequences. While we acknowledge the short term, we acknowledge the short-term benefits, but opposition demonstrate why our model works better in the long run for the stakeholder. So, as my member has already explained, proactive enforcement increased preparation in terms of administrative organization, readiness of construction materials, and legal certainty. This level of preparation ensures smoother compliances and stronger institutional capacity. And we already mentioned about the broader impact on environment, business, and consumer. We have shown that proactive enforcement is more critical for the environment because it anticipates and mitigates harm before it becomes irreversible. For business, it reduces uncertainty caused by bug or shifting regulation or politic uncertainty that incentively made by the government. And for consumer, it ensures that the product and service that they eventually receive are not compromised by unclear environmental accountability, which is why we are better because we also have better governance through transparent permit. Lastly, on why we are better than CG. So CG mentioned about that there are check and balance and it based on government and there's no excuse. Sometimes our response is that sometimes the government have their own incentive. Like my member mentioned before, they have politic incentive or even economical incentive or even to have like easier access. This is a very simple problem and even a surface level problem that going to damage all the process of the housings or even the construction process. So which is why my member already mentioned that there will be incentive politic and this is going to be harm, which is it's not aligned with the environmental regulation and also purposes, which is why comparatively in our case we by the existence of technocrat and renewal evaluation and also preparation before all the construction phases, the impact is more preventive and the preparation is more budget friendly. This is why we are better in this case, which is why we want to clarify that why CO is better from every benches because we can prove why proactive work and benefit business not only before the after they build in, but it's going to make them to be more prepareful before the construction process, and it pushes the business to have this awareness for the environmental regulation. They can actually obey and prepare the administrative need, and it's also sustainable for a long run and for the decision of what to do and not to do. And it also going to decrease the possibility of robber pajak karet, which is it's going to be harm for every party, which is why proud as opposition.
Thank you for that speech. That marks the end of this debate. Thank you, everyone.